Hey, this is Bang for Buck PC Gamer here, and this is my comparison video between an overclocked R9 290 and R9 290X. Now, if you're in the market for a new high-end graphics card from AMD, you will probably be looking at the R9 290 and the R9 290X. From the date I'm recording this video, which is the 8th of August 2014, here in the UK you can purchase an R9 290 Tri-X OC from Sapphire for £299, and you can also get an R9 290X Tri-X OC for £398. Now that's pretty much a £100 difference between the two cards, and in my opinion that's quite a lot of money. Me being someone who likes to overclock my hardware, I felt the better option was to buy myself an R9 290 and try and overclock it to match the performance of an R9 290X. Now obviously I'm not an owner of an R9 290X, so the results I want to show are from a review site called Kit Guru. Sure, there are plenty of other PC hardware review sites I could have chosen from, like Guru 3D, Tom's Hardware, but I felt Kit Guru goes the extra mile to display the exact settings they use for their benchmark runs and for their games, and this makes it a lot easier for me to replicate the results and give you a direct comparison. So the R9 290 I'm going to be using for this comparison is the Club 3D R9 290X Roll S Super Overclock. Now this card runs with a base clock of 1050 MHz and a memory of 1350 MHz. Now a standard R9 290 would come in at 1000 MHz on the core and 1250 MHz on the memory, so they boosted the core clock by 50 MHz and the memory clock by 100 MHz. The benchmarks I'm going to be using for the comparisons are 3D Mark Vantage, 3D Mark 11, 3D Mark Firestrike, Unigine Heaven, Unigine Valley, Thief at 1080p, Tomb Raider at 1080p, and Metro Last Light at 1080p. So before I show you the comparison benchmarks, I just want to walk you through my system. For the processor I'm using an Intel i5 3570K, which is overclocked to 4.8 GHz. For the motherboard I'm using an ASRock Z77 Extreme 4. For the memory I'm using 8 GB of Corsair Dominator DDR3, which is running at 1866 MHz. I know it says 933 at the moment, but DDR stands for double data rate, so you times 933 by 2 and you get 1866. Now moving on to my graphics card. My default clock speed is 947, but I was able to get it up to 1200 MHz with the overclock, and also with the memory I was able to get it up from 1250 to 1600 MHz. I use Sapphire tricks to achieve my overclock, and here are the settings. I had to increase the voltage to 168, and also I'm using a power limit of 35, and it's all running at 37 degrees Celsius at idle, so pretty safe. Now if you're curious about Kit Guru's test rig, they're actually using a Intel i7 4770K, which is at stock, and motherboard is an Asus Maximus 6 Hero Z87 motherboard. They're using 16 GB of Kingston Beast HyperX RAM, which runs at 2400 MHz, and that's about it really. I'm going to start off with 3D Mark Vantage as the first benchmark. Now what Kit Guru have done, they've actually disabled the CPU test part of the benchmark, so I'm going to do that as well, and we're just going to be looking at the graphics performance. So I'm going to run this test and then come back with the results. results are in. I'm going to start off with Kit Guru's results, and they were able to achieve 47,682 GPU score from a slightly overclocked R9 290X. Now with my overclocked R9 290, I was able to achieve 49,387 on the GPU score. So far, having a heavily overclocked R9 290 can more than outpace an R9 290X. I'm going to move on to 3D Mark 11 benchmarks now. Nothing fancy here, I'm just going to use the 3D Mark 11 performance preset benchmark, which includes GPU tests and CPU tests. So I'm going to run this now and come back with the results. So here are the results. I'm going to start with Kit Guru again first, and they were able to achieve 15,886 on the graphics score. With my overclocked R9 290, I was able to achieve 17,742 on the graphics score. As you can see, the 4770K completely wipes the floor with my 3570K, so don't pay attention to the physique score and the combined score because we're only concentrating on the graphics score. Now it's time to move on to 3D Mark Firestrike. Nothing special about this benchmark, you literally just pick Firestrike and run the test. You do have the option of using the extreme setting, but Kit Guru didn't do the extreme test, so neither will I. And here are the results. Kit Guru's R9 290X was able to score 11,426 on the graphics score, while my overclocked R9 290 was able to score 13,179 on the graphics score. So it just goes to show you the potential of a highly overclocked R9 290. It's well above a R9 290X at 1050 MHz. Now these are the settings that Kit Guru used for the Unigine Heaven benchmark. So what I'm going to do is open my Unigine Heaven and replicate the settings, just literally make sure I'm using the exact same settings. So both running at 1920 by 1080, and both quality levels are high, both running the DirectX 11 API, and we're both using full screen. So I'm going to run the test now and come back with the results. And here are the results. I'm going to start off with Kit Guru first again, and they were able to get 110.1 frames per second on average and 35.5 frames per second as a minimum. And this is why I like Kit Guru, because they take screenshots and just give you that extra amount of detail. With my R9 290 I was able to get 119.3 frames per second on average and 36.5 frames per second as a minimum. So an overclocked R9 290 really showing its stuff again against a small overclocked R9 290X. Moving on to Unigine Valley now, and I'm going to show you the settings that Kit Guru uses for this benchmark, so I can just duplicate the settings so you can run a side-by-side comparison. So we're both using 1920 by 1080 resolution. Quality levels are both on high, both using DirectX 11 and both using a single monitor, and we're both using full screen. So I'm going to go ahead and run this test now and come back with the results. So here's the results. Start off with the 290X. Was able to get 114.1 on average and 42.5 as the minimum frames per second. Now my overclocked R9 290 was able to pull 120.4 frames per second as an average and 45.6 frames per second as a minimum. This just goes to show there's not much between the two cards once you start increasing the clock speeds, despite the R9 290X having 256 extra stream processors. Moving on to the Thief benchmark now. These are the settings that Kit Guru used, so I'm just going to duplicate those settings. So we're both running Mental and using 1920 by 1080. And now for the graphics settings, we're both using the very high preset, and every single setting's identical, so it's definitely a fair test. So I'm going to run this benchmark now and show you the results. Okay, I've just finished the benchmark run, and I'll start off with the R9 290X Kit Guru results. They're able to get, using Mental, 75 frames per second on average and 62 frames per second as a minimum. And my R9 290 was able to get 64 frames per second as a minimum and 80.9 frames per second as a maximum. So overclocked R9 290 still showing that it can match and even best for R9 290X in actual games as well, not just synthetic benchmarks. So these are the settings that Tomb Raider benchmarks are going to be using. I'm going to show you what Kit Guru's R9 290X used. I know it displays a Titan black when they took the screenshot, but I'll show you it is the actual R9 290X benchmarks results that I'm going to be comparing them to. So we're both using 1920 by 1080 and the ultimate quality preset as well. Moving on to the advanced tab. As you can see, we're using the quality, which is ultimate, and all settings are identical, so I'm going to run this benchmark now and bring you the results.
Keep it to yourself. I don't need to hear. Keep your secret safe. I don't wanna know. No
And here are the results. I'll start with Kit Guru as usual. Able to achieve 86 frames per second on average and 64 frames per second minimum with the R9 290X. With my R9 290 overclocked, I was able to achieve 64.2 frames per second minimum and 84.5 frames per second average. So the R9 290X does flex its muscle in this game more so than all the other games and benchmarks that I've tested so far. But if you look at the Sapphire R9 290X Tri-X over OC, my R9 290 is able to outpace that, so it still outpaces an R9 290X, just not this particular one. So finally we come to Metro Last Light, which is the last benchmark I'm going to be doing. I'll just display the settings that Kit Guru chose to use with their R9 290X, and as usual I'll try to match those with the exact same settings before we run the benchmark. So both settings are going to be using DirectX 11 and running at 1920 by 1080 at the very high quality settings, using 16 AF, motion blur amounts at normal and tessellations at normal. So I'm going to go ahead and run this benchmark and I'll bring you the results. So here are the results. The Club R9 290X Raleigh Super Overclock was able to achieve 80 frames per second average and 15 frames per second minimum. My overclocked R9 290 was able to achieve 86 frames per second average and 9.87 frames per second minimum. And if you look closely, not only does he overtake the R9 290X, but also beats out the Titan Black as well, so that shows that the R9 290 has a lot of potential if you're willing to overclock it. So there you have it, guys. The R9 290 and the R9 290X are very close when it comes to performance, despite being over £100 between them in price. I realise not all graphics cards will overclock the same. Some will overclock better than the card I've tested, some will overclock worse, but the bottom line is the R9 290 can perform on par or even surpass the R9 290X at the right clock speeds. I really hope you enjoyed the video. This is Bang for Buck PC Gamer, and thanks for watching.